Welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm your host today. My name is Michael McKeever. Today's subject is a good one. It's called The Playwrights Dilemma, the challenges of being a professional playwright in regional theater today. I'm joined today by our usual panel of theater professionals. First up is the founder of Florida Theater on Stage and one of South Florida's most respected theater critics, the very charming Mr. Bill Hirschman. Up next, the ever wonderful actress and producer of Spotlight on the Arts, Miss Iris Acker. And last but certainly not least, the very talented and beautiful Karen Stevens, one of this region's most respected actors. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show a very well-respected playwright and one of the founding members of Zoetic Stage in Miami. This playwright has written a number of award-winning plays, including Captiva, Fear Up Harsh, and When the Sun Shone Brighter. Please help me welcome Mr. Christopher Demos Brown. Chris, let's get right into it. What are some of the challenges of being a playwright in regional theater today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. The first challenge, I think, is the challenge of getting people to read your plays so that they can get produced. And obviously, unlike a novelist or short story writer, a playwright writes to have people see a play and have people perform it. And there are quite a number of dots that have to get connected together between you're sitting in front of your computer screen and writing and people seeing a play on stage. And that's a challenge for anyone, but certainly for someone who's just starting out or who doesn't have a national track record. So that's the biggest challenge, I think.
What tactics do you use to get your plays read?
Well, I used to believe that the secret was sending out as many copies of a script as you possibly could.
Oh.
And I've come to learn that it's much more about developing relationships with people who might be receptive to your work. So I think that's the most important step a playwright can take.
How do you find those people? Where do you go to find those people who you think are going to be attuned to it?
Dark alleys, rave clubs. There are a lot of regionally. Obviously, it's easy to meet people. You go to their theaters. You try to meet them at places where playwrights hang out and where theater people hang out. Like I said, rave clubs. But nationally, it's a little bit more difficult. But over time, you learn that there are organizations like the National New Play Network that Zoetic Stage just became a member of last year. And once you get an agent, it's easier to kind of meet people as you travel around if you happen to be in other cities. But it can be difficult, especially since the decision makers, the people who can actually make the call or give the green light to a play, are kind of difficult to trace sometimes because they bounce around a lot.
Right, now you have a play that is up and running in a play here. You have to deal with a lot of things. We've titled this the Playwrights Dilemma. I don't know exactly what your dilemmas are, but it seems to me you have to deal with a director, with an actress that might be a diva. Sometimes celebrities are. And so what is your dilemma, really?
But before he answers that question,
yes.
So we can piggyback it, first you have to write a good play, right?
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally.
Actually, it's funny you say that because half the time I go see plays and I go, that one got done.
Exactly. You know, so what goes into writing, and I do want please answer Iris's question, but what goes into writing a good play? I mean, is it something you have to study for? Is it something you're just naturally inclined to do? I mean, I know there are technical aspects of it, and then, of course, once you write a good play, what's the dilemma?
If I knew what the formula was for writing a great play, it wouldn't take me so long to do, I think. To the degree there is a formula or anything I can tell you for what I think makes a good play, at least the ones that I think I've written that are decent, they have to come from an impulse that is very personal, something that either bothers me or delights me. That's why I'm reluctant to try to write a commission, because if I write somebody else's idea, I'm going to have to ground it in an impulse that's strong for me. But you're asking a big question, I think, about the craft of playwriting. I think if you were to talk to 10 playwrights, you'd come up with 10 different answers for that question. So maybe I'll answer that a little bit more as we go along, but I think the first thing is you have to have an impulse that drives you. I've told, I can't remember, I've said this over and over again because I think it describes my process well. I have kind of two stages in writing a play. The first is falling in love with the idea, and then the second stage is me telling myself, this is awful. How did I ever land on this idea? How am I going to get through it? And if you're not really in love, you're not going to get through the kind of doing the laundry, cleaning the bathrooms together phase.
Well, here's a question though. What happens when you find that you're not in love? When you start off with a subject or a topic that you're really in tune with, and then halfway through that initial stage, you find that you're no longer, the romance has started to fade. What happens then?
One of two things. The worst of which is that you just give it up. And I've done that. Sometimes you just, at least for me, I have to get a couple of weeks or months into something and say, this is not going to happen. I think it's a bad habit to let that happen too often. This good friend of mine who's a playwright, oh yeah, it's you. Gave me very good advice one time that the most important part of writing a play is finishing it, because I think most playwrights probably have 10 plays sitting in a drawer that never got finished, but you got to finish it. So when I get to that stage, I usually that's when I park myself in a room and say, you're going to spend 3 hours a day and just get through it. And usually you find that it's not as bad as you thought. But the other thing is, I think compressing the time you have, for me anyway, is a very valuable thing, because if I have unlimited time, I will use every minute of it.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
One of the things, I'm sorry.
No, we're getting back to the actual dilemmas, possibilities, which is dealing with the director, dealing, let's say, with a diva. I don't know which one you want to handle, but I'm sure you've had occasion. I call them a diva, just a troublemaker.
Well, I've been lucky because from what I've seen anyway, directors avoid that. Directors don't want to work with divas unless there's really not much choice. And there are different kinds of, I think, difficulties you can deal with when it comes to the actual casting and performers. One is people who tend to suck the air out of the room because they need so much of the rehearsal time to be spent on them. I don't, if somebody's doing that because they genuinely need to understand what's going on, that tends not to bother me so much, although I'm not around for a lot of that. But the diva that you're talking of, Iris, I think is more of a musical theater phenomenon. Sorry, everybody who's in musical theater. But I, at least in my very limited experience, directors really screen for that well.
Well, I know I'm thinking of one play that I did where the playwright, who's now a friend of mine, became an alcoholic and a chain smoker as a result of the leading lady. It was not a musical, but she had a name.
I really, the next play I do, I'm going to make sure that we do cast a diva, so I have that excuse. Because I can tell my wife, what am I going to do? Have you seen her? I guess, the most, I can't think of one experience that I've had like that. I wouldn't describe the performer as a diva, but somebody who is difficult. And
difficult, that's the word I was looking for.
Luckily, I think the other people in the play raised the level of this performer and were able to kind of spackle over some of the holes in her little wall, but otherwise you do the best you can. I think one mistake you can make is trying to kind of, and this is the struggle I had, was I'm going to dumb this down so that you can get it, and that's a mistake I won't make again. What I've learned from that experience is when I'm involved in the process because it's a premiere, and an actor wants to drag me into making the role easier to perform, I'm just going to walk away. So
that's smart. That's really smart. Yeah.
That's a hard lesson to learn, though.
One thing that's interesting is that when we're talking about playwrights in regional theater, where a great deal of new work is being premiered as opposed to in some of the major cities is that many playwrights have day jobs. The reality is that, with a few exceptions, you're an attorney, and other people are working in bookstores or they're working in summer camps, or they are the high school drama teacher. Talk a little bit about how you make time in your life as a father and husband and attorney to focus on this part of your life.
Well, I am not sure because I get asked this question probably more than any other, and I think it's only because I'm an attorney. If I did anything else as a sort of gainful employment, I don't think I'd get asked the question so much. I can't think of a single playwright who makes a living strictly writing plays, and that says something, because there are, and that's from Tony Kushner and Michael McKeever on down to people like me and one-off people, who have had single plays produced. I just don't think that if you add up the numbers, it's possible to have a living wage as a playwright in this country now. I could be wrong, and if there's somebody out there, I'd love to learn about them, but I don't think there is anyone. So I think every playwright has to, whether they're teaching drama someplace or working in the bookstore or whatever it is, has to find a way to manage time. And I think all of us probably have more time than we think we do. And I find that, again, the compression of time actually makes me a little bit more efficient.
It's interesting, you're a playwright, and it's a playwright to a playwright. Are you agreeing, or?
I completely agree. What he's saying, I'm 100 in agreement, 100% in agreement with, because it's one of those things. I'm in a lucky situation because I have a few of my plays are published, and the licensing fees of those I get paid on a monthly basis from one of the publishers. So I have that income plus productions in Europe. Without those, I mean, it's simply impossible for a playwright to produce enough work unless you write a classic and then die, and then it starts coming in then. But both Chris and myself are I'm a little quicker in writing. So I write like one every year. You write one about every
2 years. Yeah.
Right, but just as a result of that, it's impossible to produce enough work to have a constant, steady income as a playwright.
You make a good point. If you do it quick, let's do a quick calculation. I promise I'll make it quick. Michael's very prolific. He can write a full-length play a year. He can probably write one every 6 months if he really had to. Let's say one a year. And let's say you get 5 productions. That would be an extraordinarily high number of productions. I think the most produced plays in the country get a dozen productions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Let's say you have 5 productions. Let's say you're making $8,000 per production. That's a living wage. That's not going to happen every year for most people. And if you get some money on top of that. Now this is, that's a living wage for, a couple with a child, or maybe one person with, you start doing the numbers and you realize it's just really hard to make a living as a playwright, and there just aren't that many playwrights who are getting 5 productions of a play a year.
Which is a good way to segue into my next question, which is a lot of young people who are graduating, who have gone to school for playwrights, are now just jumping right over playwriting and going into screenwriting, writing for film and television. What is the importance, do you think, of sticking with the theater and writing for the live stage as opposed to making triple the money working in television and film?
Well, the two, I started out writing screenplays, and the great advantage of writing screenplays is you get a lot of money for it. You literally, to have a screenplay optioned, you'll make more than you will on a typical production of a play. The big disadvantage of writing for television or TV is you don't own what you write. You sell all of the rights to it, and then people can do whatever they want with it. You own the copyright to your play. Nobody can change a word of it without your approval. So you in terms of legacy, writing for the theater is important. The second thing, and I think the more important thing, is the upstart cost of a play. You can, in theory, if you think about it, get a non-equity production with 2 people, simple set, little 40-seat house for a couple $1,000. Most people can what is it, kickstart that production.
Right,
okay?
right.
Which means there's a very theater's very open to experimentation. It's very open to failure, and you have to be able to fail as a writer. You can't have to always succeed. You write for television, you don't get to fail. Usually it's writing by committee. If you write a screenplay, it's writing by committee at some point. So, and it's also a very different kind of writing. It's visual writing as opposed to language-oriented writing.
You know, a lot of actors, I'm so sorry, transpose.
Okay.
And I know Neil Simon fired a very well-known actress. The play was on Broadway because she was changing a word here and there, I guess. How do you feel about that?
It depends. I've been lucky in the last with Captiva and with the play that's coming up that I'm working with a director and a group of folks that I know fairly well. So if for example, if Stuart Melcher, who's directing my next play, if Stuart sits down and says, "Listen, this is a little bit of a problem," it's not a personal thing, and I trust him. If, however, with
the actor,
the diva, for example, who shall remain nameless, the Devo. Yeah, right. When this person was sitting there, kind of Baudelarizing my script because the performer couldn't get it. Now that's a problem because I especially with certain. There are certain things I understand. If it doesn't read right or it's not playing well, I understand. But when for example, this particular actress was trying to mangle a monologue, and I really take a lot of time with a monologue, and the difference between this word and that word really sometimes does make a difference.
Yes.
But can I give you another example of changing words? The play I have coming up.
What's the name?
It's called Fear Up Harsh. And it involves a Medal of Honor winner who gets a visit from a former colleague who is an African-American Southern lesbian woman. I'm not a woman and I'm not from the South.
But he is African-American.
And lesbian.
And a lesbian.
So when it comes time for, Karen happens to be playing
what
this.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. So when it comes time for us to sit around and table read, if Karen says, this probably kind of, you might want to think about this. I'll certainly listen a lot more carefully because I'm a little bit more distant from this character than I am from other characters. So in that instance, that's part of what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've never found a situation when you're working on, especially with a world premiere, where an actor could make a request that's so outrageous that you can't even at least listen to it. In a situation like this, I suspect that chances are better than not that it would be good because you understand that some element of that character that touches you, and as a playwright, you have to listen to it. And if it becomes your final word, if you don't agree, then you don't agree. But I've seldom seen anything that's so outrageous that you can't even explore it.
Usually the opposite happens. When we were doing the reading for this play in February, there was a line. A character says something about dotting his T's and crossing his I's. And the actor was reading that. He goes, "I just love the irony of that. I think it's really funny." I said, "No, that's just wrong. I just have that wrong. Let's just fix it." I mean, he didn't try and fix it. He's just, "I think no, that's just wrong." So sometimes the actor will try and honor the words to the point of absurdity.
Has it made a difference? You mentioned screenwriting. Over the decades, screenwriting has changed. There's been a shorthand that's been developed in screenwriting by screenwriters because they know that they don't need to spell out a lot of things in the detail that they did in the 40s, the 50s, and even the 60s. Over time, there are conventions that they know that their audience understands. Has there been any kind of similar change in playwriting where an audience's familiarity with screen storytelling or video games, all these things that have changed technologically, does it affect the basic art of playwriting?
I don't. That's a good question. I'm not sure that it affects the audience. There are certain conventions that I've seen just in the last 5 or 6 years in the way plays are written that have just all of a sudden sort of become the conventions, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of ways in which playwriting, at least for me, has changed as a result of.
Well, for instance, I mean, if you look at a play from the 50s or 60s, they often will be in 3 acts, and they'll often be a good half an hour longer, and they will often take time in storytelling, giving a certain level of detail. And I'm not saying that that's erased. I'm asking whether, in fact, you approach it a different way.
That's a good point. And since I'm not as familiar with now that I see what you're getting at, I think there are certain things that it seems like artistic directors and literary managers are looking for now that they probably weren't 20 years ago. One is, I think there's a real drive to have the 75 to 90 minute intermissionless play. I think there's a strong drive now for theater that differentiates itself from television and film. A word that you probably hear all the time that gets bandied around is theatricality. Mm-hmm. People want theatricality, which to me is just, I have no idea what people mean by that. I can tell you what I think it means, but I think one of the things that people are looking for is something that you can't really do effectively in film or television that works well on stage. Now, to me, one of the great elements of theater is direct address and the fact that a character can speak directly to an audience, whether to the audience or to the audience as proxy for someone. Yet one of the rules of playwriting, at least that I've heard over and over again, is that's a crutch. You should never use direct address, which I think is a lot of hooey. But I kind of danced around your question a little bit.
Okay.
Well, I've kind of noticed that, in the older plays that the scenes were a lot longer. There was a lot more exposition, and now it seems that a lot of plays are really episodic, where the scenes are very short and like a screenplay per se. And I don't know if that's...
No, that's a really good point. One of the fundamental rules of screenwriting, when I first started writing screenplays, one of my jobs was fielding screenplays and doing short treatments of them. So I read a couple hundred screenplays in about 2 years. And there was literally a rule that we had. We had a list of rules when I was reading for Warner Brothers. That one of the rules was you had to count the number of scenes that were over 2 pages. So literally, you should not have, and sometimes that would literally mean, an establishing shot, that's this long. Then, scene between 2 people, then it switches into the next room. So, what's a French scene is considered a different scene, but literally nothing should be longer than 2 minutes. And I think you're right, people are used to that from watching films and television, but I don't know, I think if you're just breaking in as a playwright, you have to be aware of these things, but the great plays still break those rules. I mean, my favorite plays of the last few years have long scenes, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll just throw the exposition right out there, just like the old days, like you're talking about.
I have to say, one of the things whenever I teach a class, I always say it's really important to know what the rules are in playwriting so you can break them. Mm-hmm. But you have to know what they are, and that gives you the starting point from where to go and to break some rules. So let me ask you, brand new playwright, right out of school, what's your advice to him?
Study math. I think the probably the most important things, and I didn't go to school for playwriting, but if I had, I think the most important things are to develop a strong relationship with a theater that will commit to you and your work somehow. That would be the first thing that I would do. 2, I would try to put yourself in a position where you can read a lot of other plays, because I think you can be writing, as a matter of fact, I think of this all the time. If Tracy Letts did not have a relationship with Steppenwolf and had not written a couple of plays before that, August Osage County is still sitting in a drawer. Guaranteed. It's 13 people, it's 3 acts, it has all the things you were just talking about. very long scenes. It's just a huge, epic piece of work. If he didn't have a relationship with somebody that was committed to him, I don't think that play ever gets done.
I think it's important to point out that August Osage County won the Pulitzer Prize and the Tony Award about 2 years ago.
Right, but it's a very hard play to do, and so I think and if you're in a position to read a lot of plays, you can have a sense of what people are looking for. And while a lot of what you hear about in playwriting school, from what I understand from my playwriting school friends, and from workshops I've been at with other playwrights, is I think playwrights are taught now in all of the big playwriting programs, let your id free. Pursue whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter. You want it episodic and kind of, stage the thing that's impossible to stage. Have an ice sculpture that melts for 2 acts. Yeah, that's good. That's beautiful. And as the ice cream drips on the floor, that play never gets done. This would be my third piece of advice would be write at least 3 plays before you start sending them out. Because you have to have the position you don't want to be in is somebody to say, I love your writing. This isn't quite what we're looking for. What else you got? And you have nothing. So I think you also have to have some awareness of what the marketplace is looking for. However, pie in the sky. You keep your August Osage County in the drawer.
Sure.
But have something out there that somebody can do.
It's great advice from a great writer. As you can tell, this man knows how to talk. He knows how to write dialogue. He's just really wonderful. He's got some beautiful, wonderful plays out there. And there's a lot of really great theater out there as well. And we encourage you all to go out and see it. There are theaters all over this region, and all they need is you in the audience. If you want to find out where and how to get there, go to floridatheateronstage.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll see you next week. I'm Michael McKeever. Bye.